This meeting is now being recorded.
So as always, we record these webinars so that if you want to go back and revisit any portion of it, if you want to share it with a colleague, with another partner that you work with, then that's an option. I will send a follow-up email. It usually takes about 24 hours to process the recording. And with Thanksgiving, we might have a slight delay, but certainly by next week, you should receive an email from me with instructions on how to access that recording. Other than that, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cassie Brooks, who is this group's facilitator. But as a reminder, this part of the webinar series is open to individuals outside of the CLPHA membership. So we do have some non-housing authority folks joining us today. Welcome. We're very excited to have you. But just wanted to remind folks of that so they are conscious of that during the Q&A sections. Cassie?
Great. Yep, this is Cassie Brooks from the Chicago Housing Authority. Excited to be on the call today and for us to have, we've got a pair of presentations, one coming from HUD and then one coming from both a housing authority and their local school partners. And we're actually going to have them go ahead and go first. So I know Albert's going to be pulling up their presentation. So we have Courtney Cameron from the Seattle Housing Authority and also Kathleen I'm going to mess it up, Conanan from Seattle Public Schools. So the two of them are going to present on their intergovernmental partnership between the Housing Authority and the public schools. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions in the public chat to the side. You can also use the Q&A button, which is up at the top of your screen. So either way, feel free to give some feedback or questions, and we'll go ahead at the conclusion of their presentation and have the opportunity to ask them some of those questions from there.
Yep, and we're just, there's just a slight delay on my end, so we will have that presentation up here in just a moment for you all. But
sure.
As Cassie said, thank you so much for pointing out where the question section is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to say, I see that our other presenter has been able to join us, and I know he has to hop off just a little early. So if it's okay with Courtney and Kathleen, I think we're going to go back to our original order. Is that okay with folks?
That's great.
Okay, thanks for your patience.
Kevin, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yep, I just got on.
Great. So we're pulling up your presentation right now. If you want to give folks a bit of background before we get started.
Sure. So my name is Kevin Solarte. I'm in the Secretary's office at HUD, and I focus on a few things on my portfolio, but one of them being the intersection between housing and education. And so Secretary Castro really came in with a strong charge to the team to and really look at the work that we're doing across the education sphere and set an agency goal around improving the educational attainment of children living in HUD-assisted housing. So we have approached that through kind of an array of different strategies over the course of the last 9 months or so as we've really tried to stand up this policy priority across HUD. And as you could probably imagine, now we're looking at how do we translate that into a transition to keep moving into future administration.
Right now, the measures that we're collecting, or that the HFIS assistant is collecting.
So I think there's someone might need to be. Can folks hear me?
Really getting to this kind of level.
For that.
No.
Hello, can folks hear me?
Yep, I can hear you,
Okay.
Kevin.
Sorry, I think there was there was some background.
Sure, what happened there?
Yeah. All right, great. So we can go to the next slide. And do I have control over this? Okay, I'll let you do it. Okay. So our priority, policy priority, again, that we overall developed is really looking at increasing the educational attainment of HUD-assisted tenants. So we really think about that across our programs, both in public housing, voucher housing, and our multifamily programs. And so we looked at three major strategies. I'm going to focus mostly on the number 2 highlighted here because that's kind of the topic at hand for this discussion, but I just wanted to briefly highlight kind of the overall 3 strategies. And first strategy was really looking at public and private partnerships that we have, how we can use those to push out resources and best practices to public housing authorities and multifamily owners. And so that has really been just an array of different partnerships that we have with educational partners, such as Campaign for Grade Level Reading, First Book, and other partnerships like that. The second one is really our increased coordination with federal partners to develop interagency strategies, and that's the one I'm going to focus most on today. And then our third strategy is really improving the local data sharing and research to better understand the educational needs of HUD-assisted residents, as well as what impact some of the strategies that all of you on the phone, housing authorities have been implementing or have had up and running for some years. So how do we improve that ability to data share at a local level so that a housing authority really has a way to tell are some of these strategies that you all are putting in place helping move the needle some on the educational outcomes of the children that you're serving. So we can go on to the next slide. All right, so again, I want to focus, because the theme here of today is really on that interagency collaboration and how do you do this work across silos. So in the federal government, we're thinking of it in terms of kind of federal agencies, but at the local level, I think you can in many ways think of it the same at a local level, kind of how you're breaking through those different silos. So one of the pieces that we focused on during this administration was really public benefits for low-income students. We're talking about higher ed students here. And so you'll see a screenshot of the letter that was released on November 15th by 6 agencies, signed on by 6 cabinet-level secretaries around how do you really look at coordinating and ensuring that low-income students have access to the public benefits that they qualify to make sure that higher education is both obtainable as well as sustainable, right? How do you sustain yourself in higher education for those low-income students that will qualify for these different types of services? And so we have been working through a White House initiative really to bring these 6 agencies together to really look at kind of the comprehensive across everything from housing to food assistance to TANF to other type of labor assistance. And so I encourage you I can send that link around to Abra to get out to the group if you haven't seen it already, but that was just released last week. Go on to the next slide. HUD-specific piece to that letter and to some of the updated guidance that we have done in this space was really to look at the higher ed student rule. So as all of you on the phone are probably more than aware of, there is the restriction on serving students under the age of 24 who are full-time students in Section 8 housing. And there were some exceptions to that being if that student is a veteran, married, has a dependent, or independently qualifies. And so we partnered strongly with the Department of Education to look at their definition of independent student, seeing that it was not in line with the way we were previously defining independent student. And so we updated that. And what that really has done, you can go on to the next slide. What that has really done is the new guidance really ensures that we're aligned completely with the independent student definition used by the Department of Education, which was broader than what we were referencing in our old guidance. Therefore, it really opened up the door for some vulnerable populations of higher education students under the age of 24 that weren't previously being served. And that includes former foster youth, unaccompanied homeless youth, and youth in guardianships. And the way that they really fit in is they meet that exception number 4 being independently qualifying. So it really kind of was our way of re-looking at our guidance and making sure that we are really targeting that type of housing to those students that qualify for it who are fit into these vulnerable populations. And the other piece that we did is the previous guidance has some pretty strong steps in terms of the documentation that you need to verify that you meet independent student guidance, and so we cleaned that up a little bit for what we're considering those vulnerable populations to really ensure that the documentation is not becoming a barrier. So, for example, previously the documentation would have said that to prove you're an independent student, you would need kind of a signed letter from your guardian saying that they're not supporting you financially. Well, for a former foster youth or an accompanied homeless youth, that would be a very hard thing for them to accomplish. You can go on to the next slide. The other big piece that we're working on right now that we're very excited about, and some of you on the phone may have heard us talk about it, kind of combines our Strategy 2 and our Strategy 3, which was Strategy 2 is really about the interagency collaboration, and Strategy 3 was around the data sharing. And so what we have heard from lots of conversations with CLPHA and with CLPHA membership and other PHAs is really kind of this guide, really needing guidance from both the Department of Education and HUD around how do you data share at this local level. Everything from, how do you make the case between a housing authority and a local school district that data sharing is important? How do you formalize that relationship so that you're talking to the right people within the school district level and the housing authority level? And how do you formalize what do those data sharing agreements look like? As well as once those data sharing agreements are in place, what are you tracking and monitoring around key educational indicators? So what are some of those key indicators, such as attendance or third grade reading levels, that you should be looking at? And then also putting together kind of what are the kind of, like I said, the examples of those key indicators with some research to practice examples. So really looking at giving some examples of this is how you might take it from on a very practical level of a housing authority wanting to address, let's say, chronic absenteeism, and what are the measures you would need to look at, and kind of what are the programs you could put in place, or the strategy you can put in place to try to move the needle there. So we're really excited about that. It's under development right now in conjunction with the Department of Education, which we think is really important because it will really gives the opportunity for a statement from both HUD and the Department of Education to talk about data privacy and what should be in place as you kind of navigate those relationships between a housing authority and a school district to start going down those roads, and really kind of focuses on what the breadth of things that can actually be done without having to have without sharing individualized personal information, and how you really navigate FERPA, which is that law that governs the privacy around educational data. So look for that to come in the coming months. We are working on finalizing that with the Department of Education, and hope to have that out to the community, in the next coming months. Next slide. And so, one of the big things that really came out of this strategy is really just a deeper collaboration with the Department of Education. And so we have started to meet for about 6 or 7 months now, a bi-monthly collaboration meeting where we really take all of the folks across HUD, different programs, across the Department of Education's different programs, and come together on a bi-monthly basis to track the progress on any cross-agency projects that we're focusing on, and those specific to the intersection of housing and education, as well as identify gaps in the field and develop interagency strategies. So the data sharing roadmap is a prime example of this. Through these collaboration meetings and through all the feedback that we've gotten from CLPHA and CLPHA membership and other housing authorities, we really heard loud and strong the need for guidance, toolkits, things like that around how you do this data sharing. And so through this bi-monthly collaboration meeting, we were able really to come together with Department of Education, map out a plan, and say this is going to be the path forward on how we try to address this in guidance to both of our entities, right? So that it's really speaking to both public housing authorities and to school districts around the importance of this. And the other thing we have done is, the other main thing that I think comes out of this bi-monthly collaboration meeting is really the opportunity to engage staff and leadership across both agencies on implementing cross-agency goals that look at housing and education. So we've been doing a lot of work on both sides of the two federal departments to look at how do we come together and when we're setting our agency goals, so that potentially could we set an agency goal together, or at minimum we really look at how do our agency goals complement each other, so that they're really looking at the intersectionality of housing stability and educational obtainment. And that is ongoing work and I think exciting work that we're really doing with the Department of Education as we move forward. Next slide. And so that's kind of my summary of where we are in terms of that kind of collaboration across an interagency approach to addressing housing and education. I will say, one priority as we continue to move this work forward in the coming months will really be to engage with our partners at Health and Human Services a lot more in terms of all the work that they do around early childhood programming, the Head Start, early Head Start, home visiting. It's conversations that we have started and that we're excited, and that there's a lot of excitement on in both agencies and moving forward. We just have not made as much progress on that end as we have with the Department of Education, but it is definitely a priority as we continue this work to move forward. And there is, commitment from, I know the big thing in the room is the transition coming, but there is commitment from career staff that will be staying on both sides, both in HUD and ED, to continue these bi-monthly collaboration meetings and continue working on these strategies that we have put forward into the next coming months. So my contact information is on this last slide. Encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or feedback that you want to give on the work that we're doing across this interagency approach.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I know that just as a reminder to our listeners, you are on mute, but there are opportunities for you to give feedback and ask questions. We have both the public chat to the left as well as the Q&A button up at the top. I know that Kevin has to be leaving here shortly, so if you do have any questions for him, now would be a great time to ask them or give some feedback. Kevin, I just had one to start off, which was as you go into the early childhood space, what do you think are some of the sort of goals there or just sort of alignments that you think are natural or maybe low-hanging fruit that you're looking forward to?
Sure. I think some of the programming around the home visiting programs as well as the early Head Start. I will say we've made most headway, I think, so far in the home visiting programs, and really thinking about, there's evidence base behind how home visiting programs can impact that educational readiness and obtainment of everywhere from prenatal, up to 5 years old. So we have the evidence base behind that. So how do we then focus on what kind of partnerships do we put in place to really ensure that HUD-assisted residents have access to those programs? So how are we increasing the penetration rate of HUD-assisted residents into home visiting or early Head Start programs? So I think that's the easiest way I think we're thinking of. The lowest hanging fruit is just increasing the rate of HUD-assisted residents have access to that. And so I think that'll be one of the big focuses as we move forward.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple questions coming in. The first from Marcia and focused on understanding a bit more. Does that mean that early childhood education will be included in the HUD meetings, or will there be separate meetings, especially since we released the policy statement? So I think there's kind of just a question about sort of where does this live and how does that structure sort of move forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that has still to be determined on what's the best structure. So I know that there is some kind of interagency work that already exists, some structure that already exists between Department of Education and Health and Human Services around early education. So I think it's about exploring, do we add HUD to that? Do we need to have a separate structure? So those are all the questions that we're still considering as we move forward. But I think that we have kind of a model in place with some of the work that we're doing with the Department of Education that we can really bring HHS more into the fold. And I think, to Marcia's point, is a good point that we did release a joint statement between the agencies. All three agencies, HUD, HHS, and ED, signed on early education and homelessness. And I think that is a good indication, I hope, to the field of the fact that these conversations are deep underway and are going to continue to progress as we move forward in the next couple months.
Great, thank you. And then we have a couple questions from Michael coming in regards to particularly the data share elements that you have explained that HUD and the Department of Ed will be drafting a model data sharing agreement that PHAs and school districts might use. Will the template allow for sharing of data for research purposes without parental permission? And then will that template also allow for third-party researchers?
So I want to be clear, we're not developing a model data sharing agreement. We really, in conversations with the Department of Education and their privacy folks, really determined that the best product to present out that would be most useful at a broader level to housing authorities that are on different levels of where they are on sharing data was really kind of the roadmap to how do you share the data, how do you get to a data sharing agreement, what are you tracking, and we really, the strategy around the actual data sharing agreements to put in place, I think the Department of Education, and we agreed, felt pretty strongly that can be so specific to a jurisdiction and to a community that it's really best to get to the data shared agreement place and then engage in conversations with Department of Education and HUD together and with the Department of Education's privacy office that is able to offer technical assistance on this to really jump into kind of the specifics of that particular community. So I just want to be clear, the roadmap that we're putting out will not necessarily have a model data sharing agreement, although I know, and I don't want to speak to this because this is CLPHA's work, but that CLPHA has done work in this space of a model data sharing agreement, and I think we'll continue that work. But I think from the federal office's perspective, it was hard to do a model, and I think what really we will be able to offer in the next couple of months is the opportunity to have a conversation with HUD and ED for your particular community and see what kind of technical assistance could be offered.
Yeah, so thank you, Kevin. CLPHA does have, I think most everyone on the webinar has seen it, but if not, I'm more than happy to share that with you, the data sharing template that CLPHA has developed, and answer any questions about that.
And I think, the commitment really between HUD and ED moving forward and this partnership is really to think about, to get those types of communities that Michael, you're raising, get those types of questions in and figure out how do we answer them specifically for your community might be the better route than trying to put out something more general from the federal offices, just because some of the questions could just be so specific to a jurisdiction that it's hard to do it the other way around.
Understood. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions, I think, and we are at about halfway through our time today. So thank you very much. We obviously also have your contact information there, both your phone and email. So I think we will go ahead and transition at this point. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Great. And next we'll be having our Seattle duo from both the Housing Authority and Seattle Public Schools. I know it's going to take us a second just to get the presentation loaded. So Courtney and Kathleen, can you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your partnership and how long you guys have been working together?
Sure. We are more than happy to share. Kathleen just started in her role about 6 weeks ago, and she's going to talk a little bit about the scope that she has in her role and where she was prior to working at Seattle Public Schools. So maybe we'll start with Kathleen, and then I can talk a little bit about SHA.
Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Poninen, and yes, I'm a month and a half into my new role here at Seattle Public Schools, but I spent 4 years at Seattle Housing Authority working on the Yesser Terrace Choice neighborhood redevelopment. So I'm actually more familiar with how things work on the Seattle Housing Authority side, but I think this is such a great partnership because Courtney Cameron is so well versed on the district side, and I only have to use my connection with her, and I feel like her name is a secret password, and everyone is she's so respected over at the district. So my role is to be a counterpart with Courtney in moving this partnership forward, and the partnership believed that it was a good idea to have someone who is well versed in the housing authority, based in the Seattle Public Schools, to really connect district departments to this work.
So one of the strategies, just in thinking about intergovernmental partnership and the partnership that we have set up, is cross-sector hiring. That for us has been huge. So prior to working at Seattle Housing Authority, as Kathleen mentioned, I used to be at Seattle Public Schools. Kathleen used to be at Seattle Housing Authority and now is at Seattle Public Schools. So that strategy in and of itself has really helped think about relationships with understanding the unique culture and assets of each institution, and just building a way of working together that is new. And so I just encourage others on the phone, where possible, to just do something simple in terms of sharing job descriptions or job openings with your cross-sector partners. We have other instances at the school district where housing authority staff have been hired. So we see this as a very promising strategy to help deepen the partnership that we have across sectors. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into our presentation. So thank you for pulling that up. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Seattle Housing Authority and who we serve and our size, and then we're going to do the same for Seattle Public Schools. And then we're going to talk a little bit about data and the work that we've done together, and then the work that we hope to do together. So we serve just over 34,000 people. 2/3 of our households are elderly or disabled, and the average tenure is about 7 years. We also, as a note, work closely with our neighboring public housing authorities. So I know Tacoma's on today, and King County are two of our close partners in just sharing the learning around education and housing. And we also connect with Home Forward in Portland and Vancouver. We recently completed a 5-year strategic planning process, and we have 3 kind of large areas of things that we're focused on over the coming 5 years. And the reason that I think this is very important is that our youth achievement and focus on youth is nested very specifically within one of our key areas of focus. So we're looking at expanding housing opportunities, looking at the quality of our communities and connection to assets in the neighborhood, and then also around quality of life. So we're looking at promoting access to high-quality learning opportunities, connecting young adults to education pathways, and looking at college and career readiness.
Seattle Public Schools is the largest urban district in the Pacific Northwest and the largest in the state. So this is just a snapshot of details about our district. There's 53,872 students enrolled. We are home to students who speak 128 different languages and dialects and have 148 different countries of origin. And so even though we're growing in size, we're actually in some ways becoming less diverse due to the cost of living and other factors that are related to our city. Charter schools have just started opening up in the last couple of years, but for the most part, Seattle students are attending public school if they're not in a private institution. And then this is a little bit about our strategic plan. Our first goal is to ensure education excellence and equity for every student. So this year we're really leading with an initiative to eliminate the opportunity gap that exists. And on all levels of the district, we're looking at the needs of the whole child. So for goal 2, it's to improve our systems district-wide to support the academic outcomes and meet students' needs. And then our last goal, goal 3, our partnership with Seattle Housing Authority really falls under this. And how can we be strategic and intentional about our partnerships with major institutions like Seattle Housing Authority, the City of Seattle, King County, and our nonprofit partners to help us best serve students. And so the next slide is a graph that really highlights the achievement gap for our school district. The achievement gap between white students and students of color persists across our country, but this graph really highlights it. The school districts in the bottom labels are the school districts with the largest Black student population, and Seattle Public Schools has the largest achievement gap in our state and the 5th largest gap among major national cities. So we are really examining the achievement gap this year, and we do have schools within our district that have successfully narrowed this gap. So we are taking a hard look at what can we learn from them this year and scale those practices citywide. So the next slide, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is a highlight of our Eliminating the Opportunity Gap initiative, which is a district-wide initiative that's very focused. I think one of the things that I'll highlight about it is that it's not putting all the onus on the student to make changes, but rather how can the district evolve and transform our teaching practices, leadership practices, and organizational practices so that we're being culturally responsive to the needs of the whole child.
So one of the reasons that in preparing for this presentation, Kathleen and I, and conversations with Abra too, wanted to talk about our strategic plans was because we are really intentionally trying to partner at the systems level. So we have examples of partnership that are very geographically based. So we have a Choice Neighborhood grant. We have a Race to the Top grant that we applied for jointly with the school district that's geographically based. But we're also really thinking across our systems, connecting our strategic plan. Our executive director meets with our superintendent regularly. So we're really looking for how we take practices that may be good in one geography and look at opportunities to replicate and to scale those practices. So one of the things we're looking at kind of currently is where our students live and where our students are going to school. So the map that you see in front of you shows the percent of SHA students by school. And you can look at where we have more students and less students. The geography of our city is very north and south. So those familiar with Seattle will know that, and those in other parts of the country may not be familiar with that. So we serve more students in the southern part of our city, but we have students across our city. And so that's really important when we're thinking about the system level partnership and opportunities for working together. So there are a few new schools that are going to be opening in Seattle Public Schools because of enrollment growth and changes. And we are looking to work really closely with those principals because we know that we're going to have a large number of students attending those schools. So we're trying to engage families in a new way, engage them in the development of those schools as those principals have a year to plan the school climate that they want to have, hire the teachers, bring on other staff. So we really see ourselves as an asset to Seattle Public Schools and how they're thinking about engaging specifically with our families around the development of those buildings. So another thing that we're looking at in terms of our data, and this is just one example, we just got our second data match for the 15-16 school year. So this is just an example of one of the things we will be spending some time on. This shows our graduation rate. So this is the graduation rate for SHA students as compared to the district average. So what you can see in the blue bar is that the district graduation rate did not change much. Ours increased a little, but when you see the sample size, it's not incredibly significant. But we're right now taking with the second data match that we have a hard look at what are the meaningful metrics that we should be looking at to build out our goals over time And, what does that look like? So we're also looking at attendance rates. We know that chronic absenteeism is an issue for some of our families and students, and what can we do as a housing authority to help ensure that we reduce the rates of chronic absenteeism. So we're just spending a lot of time around this new data match. We also have a number of projects that are currently underway and new ones that we hope to start. So I just want to speak very briefly about this. And Kathleen is very knowledgeable about these, which is one of the advantages of this cross-sector hiring is that we have a depth of knowledge of each other's systems. So I'm going to start off, and then Kathleen will chime in with some more information too. We have some community-based initiatives, including Choice. We have some work happening in our Hope 6 communities. We have a Dream Big scholarship that is given to students annually. We're also working on improved FAFSA completion and are really pleased to see that HUD and DOE are working together on that. And as an NTW agency, we have funds that are set aside for services and service contracts.
And I just wanted to add that through our Hope 6 and Choice Neighborhood redevelopments, I've had the opportunity to work closely with students and families in our Yesler neighborhood, and have seen firsthand that we also have students who are excelling in their education, who are taking advantage of the opportunities. And so these are just a few pictures of some of the students who received a scholarship or who are participating in our internship programs. And I think that Seattle Housing Authority, through our redevelopments, has really helped make the neighborhoods a safer place, has really given housing stability to many students for them to take advantage of these programs. We are building Breathe Easy apartments that have shown to decrease asthma hospitalization rates among children. So there's a lot of work and impact that the Housing Authority can have on the lives of our student population as well. Oh, and I wanted to add that we're also trying to approach this from a strengths-based perspective, and wanted to reiterate that we do have students across the spectrum who are excelling in education or experiencing challenges. And so we also want to support students who have skills such as a second or third language. How can we support them in, one of the things we're exploring this year is how can we support them in receiving high school credit towards graduation, and looking at their strengths as an asset in their academic career.
So this is just a little context. There's a lot of words, and we won't go into this in detail, but Kathleen and I are more than happy to follow up after this call too. But we have been working together for a couple years. Some of this work was motivated by working together on grant application processes around Choice Neighborhood, and some is motivated by our partnership that is supported with funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The funding from the Gates Foundation supports having the staffing capacity within SHA and within SPS to stay focused on this work, to spend the time needed to figure out the data sharing agreements, to figure out what we do with the data once we have it, to convene regular meetings with senior staff at both agencies. So I think that's just an important note that I see there was a question from Maria around how many staff we have working on this, and some are directly funded with funds from the Gates Foundation grant, and some this connects to existing work that was already underway. So we took some time in our partnership to do a research report and a partnership plan focused with 3 strategies. One around working with data on an ongoing basis to really inform the work that we're doing, to look at the impact that we can have together. One around a dual generation focus, so how do we think about the household instead of what we do for adults and what we do with kids? How do we actually think about what we can meaningfully do when we have a household perspective? And then the other about policy change. How can we work together when there's a major policy change around shifting the start and end times for the school day, or changes in how boundaries are drawn that affect a large number of students and where their families will be attending, or their children will be attending school. We have lots of things underway in our do section, and we see this education partnership from a housing authority perspective as the large umbrella under which we hang each of these projects, knowing some have shorter-term funding and other longer-term funding. We have a multi-year memorandum of understanding, which really sets the foundation for our partnership and allows us to be nimble to take advantage of opportunities that may present themselves. And then we have a multi-year data sharing agreement and an ongoing governance structure to support this partnership. We also just are in the process of working with the Urban Institute to do a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And they are going to be completing that by the beginning of 2017, and would be happy to share some of that learning that we have from that evaluation. And they did a set of interviews and a site visit to help us really think about where our partnership is and where we can take it in the years to come. And we're thinking a lot about all the projects we have underway and how do we make decisions about what we replicate, what may be specific to a particular geography, and what we might be able to scale. So as we plan for the next phase of our work, that evaluation from the Urban Institute, along with some of the questions that we're asking internally about that replication and how we serve a geographically bounded group, or how we think about our HCV Section 8 participants, we're trying to get smarter in that space. Would you add anything?
I just say that the arrows on the right represent that this isn't a linear process. Because we finished our data sharing agreement over the summer, now we have access to more data than we did before, and so are learning more about the kids that we serve. And as some of our neighborhood-based projects are carrying out, we're also learning more about what types of barriers students are facing, or what types of support and need they have, and trying to adjust around that. So we're really trying to do all of these at one time to make sure that we are grasping the whole picture.
So we know we house 1 in 10 Seattle Public School students. That's a huge point of leverage for us, and that we are a big partner as SPS looks at any major systems change, and are pleased that they have been such an incredible partner in this work together. And we know based on our data sharing agreements, we have students in almost every Seattle Public School. These are the 3 major strategies that I outlined a little bit earlier, one around data, one about dual generation, and then the other about acting as bold allies in systems change.
And then lastly, we wanted to highlight our partnership structure. And before I came on board, there was a lot of time and investment on the relationship building between the Housing Authority and Seattle Public Schools at all levels. So on the right there, we have our Executive Steering Committee, and it is comprised of the Executive Director, Andrew Lofton of Seattle Housing Authority, and Dr. Nyland, our Superintendent, really coming together on a quarterly basis with our cabinet members of both agencies to really help guide us and talk about major policy changes and how that might affect our shared population. And then right there in the middle, we are accountable ultimately accountable to our group of students, families, our boards, our funders, and then our implementation team exists at the school level with our community partners and individual Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Housing Authority departments. And Courtney and I are there at the bottom trying to coordinate among all groups and to ultimately be accountable to students and families. And so I'm really pleased that all this work has been done in the last couple of years to really set the foundation so that we can move forward in working together and setting goals and action items that are going to be most impactful to serve our students. And so our emails are in this last slide. We're happy to answer any questions now and after this webinar. Thanks so much for listening.
Great. Thank you both so much. I know you've been able to answer some of our questions as they've been coming in, so thank you for that as well. But if you do have any final questions, they can be put in the Q&A box or in the public chat, and I know Kathleen and Courtney would be happy to take those on. So I have just a quick question to get sort of started. As far as how long, or I know the data share has always been a component for a large number of our partnerships. How long did that take you all, and was that something that was started sort of before these more formal partnerships, or was that just one of the first items off the list when you guys did have a more formal established partnership?
So I would say that took about a year, which seems incredibly long, but I think to get clarity around what we actually wanted to share took time, what we could share, how we would share, how we would protect that data, and then who would work on analyzing it and where we had the capacity to do that, to actually analyze what we have and then act upon it. When you break out all those pieces, it does take a significant amount of time. Like, we are happy to share our journey in that. I know that our neighboring housing authorities have also spent a lot of time thinking around data. And, we have a lot to learn from each other in this space, and it's very helpful to hear that HUD and DOE are working together. CLPHA has done work on the data piece. And I appreciate just this community for the generous sharing of best practices. So it has absolutely taken us a significant amount of time, even with having the ability to focus on it.
Great, thank you. And I know Maria has posted a couple questions for you guys just in regards to sustainability once grants end, and also if RAD has affected you in these efforts.
So I can't speak directly to the RAD piece, but I would say not at this point has this had a direct impact on us. And we are thinking a lot about sustainability. We are really trying hard to lay a strong foundation that can be nimble and that can be sustained over time. So the large umbrella of our partnership and our three major strategies, as I described, many projects hang under that, and some more successful than others. And so we're thinking a lot about how we sustain particular efforts and how we fund them. And where we may be able to partner with the City of Seattle, where we may partner with the school district, and where we may partner with the philanthropic community to sustain those efforts that we see as promising. We continually think about the sustainability factor when we start something new, and I think that's very important when starting new projects, especially as cross-sector, is if this is successful, how will we know, and how would we sustain? So not waiting until the end, but having that part of planning, I think, is essential.
And Courtney and I are having a lot of discussions now about how do we integrate this work across departments within Seattle Housing Authority and Seattle Public Schools. So my first approach coming into my new position is to meet with the different departments within Seattle Public Schools and talk about what are their goals and objectives within their department, and how can this partnership with SHA help them achieve those goals as well. And we also have a larger initiative, as I mentioned, about eliminating the opportunity gap. So trying to connect with these larger district-wide strategies as well.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, I see Michael's question around, is the district contributing any funding to these efforts? And the position that the Housing and Education Manager position that is filled by Kathleen is the first that we know of in the country really designed for a school district to think differently about housing, to be a point of contact for Seattle Housing Authority, but also Kathleen is working very intentionally with the nonprofit housing community beyond Seattle Housing Authority, and also with McKinney-Vento staff that work with homeless students who are identified and experiencing homelessness. So the district is currently not contributing any specific funding to the Housing and Education Manager position, but the district has absolutely contributed significant in-kind hours of staff to work in partnership with Kathleen to change the way that they're thinking about housing, engaging families, meeting the needs of McKinney-Vento staff. Just last week, Seattle Housing Authority staff went to meet with some partners at Seattle Public Schools to talk about our lottery for Section 8 opening and how we could engage families in a new way in that process. So, so I would say no staffing dollars, but they have given an incredible amount of time and support.
That's great. Thank you. I was also kind of curious in terms of, given that you have that statistic that you have 1 in 10 students, have you been able to really use that as leverage internally? Have there been specific initiatives that you've been able to really, like champion, given that kind of saturation?
Absolutely. So when we say we house 1 in 10 students who are almost in every single Seattle public school, people think about the work that we do differently. They think about how they can communicate by working collaboratively with us. So we sent, for the first time, our executive director sent a back-to-school letter to our families to just share some of the key changes that were happening with the school district. So the start and end time of school was changing. There was an opportunity to access free bus cards through our ORCA system for students in a new way. So there were some tangible resources that were offered through a partnership with the City of Seattle. So knowing with data that we house 1 in 10 students means that we can be part of conversations and at the table for conversations and engage families in a way at the front end versus just the back end of major policy systems change.
And as Courtney mentioned, we have 3 new schools opening up in 2017, and so we are having conversations with those principals now about how can we get Seattle Housing Authority residents connected to the opportunities that they're at these new schools and have a voice in how that school is shaped.
That is fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I think we are coming up on the end of our time here, and we've been able to get through our questions. So thank you guys so much for your for all the information on your partnership, and that your contact information is available if individuals have additional questions they'd like to ask you personally.
Yeah, I just want to echo Cassie's words. Thanks so much to all of the presenters today. And I will also just add that should there be any other follow-up questions, you can also feel free to contact me. It's Abra, A-B-R-A, @CLPHA.org. And for those of you who might have jumped on a little bit late, we did go ahead and record today's session, so that will be available for you to review or share with colleagues. And you'll get a follow-up email about how to access that recording. So with that, unless Cassie has anything else, then thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you so much.